Welcome to Brave with Lisa YouTube channel. My name is Lisa Bruton and my goal is to inspire you to live bravely in that unique rhythm of grace that God has designed just for you. On this channel, we are going to be hearing from amazing people from all different walks of life who are bravely walking in that unique rhythm of grace and calling that God has designed just for them. I know that as we hear their stories, we are going to learn a lot. We're going to find keys that are going to help us to also walk bravely in that unique rhythm of grace and that unique calling that God has just for you and for me. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Brave with Lisa YouTube channel. My name is Lisa Bruton and today I have the fabulous Claire Roberts. Now, Claire and I are friends on Instagram and her Instagram page is like fast becoming my favorite because it's real, it's funny, it's encouraging, and it's full of a lot of wisdom. So I know we're going to get all of that from her today and more. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you. Very excited to be on here.
I'm excited that you're here too. So Can you share with us a bit about your world? I know you've got your fingers in a few different pies and what are you passionate about?
So I am Claire. I recently turned 40, so I did that big milestone. Didn't do anything crazy, but, coloured all the greys and did all that sort of stuff. But I'm just someone that's really passionate about doing life well because I've lost lots of people in my world early, and the first 40 years has kind of just been really intense and really hard. And so I'm just someone that's really passionate about creating a beautiful life, regardless of what you go through. And that sounds really cliche, but I suppose my story proves that you can go through some really yucky stuff and still have a life. It might not look like what you wanted it to look like, but it will still look and can be beautiful. There's still, there's beauty in the rough, as the saying goes. And so I'm just super passionate about that. And I do that with my Instagram page, as you mentioned. It used to be something else because I was too scared to put myself out there. And I thought, I'm not brave enough to do it all. So I did it in another way. And then I just felt God say, no, it's just you, just be you and your journey. So that's what it turned into. And then it's turned into like a little bit of a business because I make candles. And now I've wrote a book. So that's kind of, and I'm married. So that's just in case that's important to anyone. But I am married. I don't have any kids, but I'm married and I live on the Gold Coast and I've lived here pretty much my whole life. So I've done primary school, high school, everything here. So, yeah.
Oh, you're a true local then. They're very rare.
Been going to the same church 15 plus years. If you're stuck with me, you're stuck with me. You can't get rid of me.
Very loyal. I love that.
Yeah.
Now, you were touching on then about, having some tough times. And I know that you've written a book, like you said, and in that book you speak about that. Can you share with us that story and your journey? When we were chatting beforehand, you called it living with an unanswered prayer, and something just hit me so deeply because there's so many that are living with unanswered prayer. And so I know we're all going to be leaning in to hear your story.
I wrote a book. I didn't think I had anything of value in my life, or probably most of it, because my life has just been a series of unanswered prayers. And I thought, well, there's nothing. I've never crossed the line and been like, here's the trophy to show for it. And so I was like, my story's not complete yet because I haven't crossed that line. And then God was like, you need to still write your story. You need to write your story even in the midst of not being anywhere near the finish line. And I was like, but how? You always want a happy ending to a story. I'm a big Hallmark fan, so I love all those movies. I know the guy's going to get the girl. I know it, but I still watch them. And so for me, my life kind of felt like the guy had met the girl, but he never got the girl. And I was like, how is there a story? I was just like, I don't understand how there's a story in that, Lord, and how there's value in that. And so he just said, keep writing your story, keep writing. And I was like, I avoided it for about 5 years and wouldn't do it. And then I just sat and COVID hit. And I was stuck alone for 9 weeks in the house, give or take, because my husband's a FIFO coal mine worker. So he comes in and goes. So I have a lot of time on my own. And I just started writing. And so I just went right back to the start from where it all started, because I thought, well, that's where every story starts, at the start. So I just kind of went back, and it was such a healing process. And I went back to the days with my mum where we were just mother and daughter, because my dad and my mum split really early. And then at the same sort of time that my mum and dad split, my auntie committed suicide, which was her sister. So that was this massive shift in my mum's world. Luckily, I was too young to kind of figure out what was happening at that point, but it shifted because mum had postnatal depression at the same time. So you kind of put all that together, and it all went really bad. And then when I was reunited with her, I took over the mother role, and she went kind of into that child mode. We had a beautiful relationship, but it was layered, because it was layered with addiction to prescription meds and just mental illness and depression and just a world of hurt, basically. She just was consumed with her pain, which was, justified in it. So I went back and I wrote about all of that in my book. And then I went the book and everything I do comes to the one moment where my mum made the choice to leave this earth voluntarily because pain was just too much. So I watched this woman struggle, and she made the choice to follow her sister and take her own life. And I just went, I'm sick of pain winning. I'm sick of bad stuff happening. I'm sick of that happening. And I didn't know how that looked yet, but I was like, this is not okay. This is just not okay. And my nana had lost 2 daughters to suicide then at this point. So then kind of went there. I touch on my own eating disorder, which was just me trying to figure out life at 16. And starving yourself is not the way to do it. And then probably the biggest battle I've had, which has been a decade long, is not being able to have a baby. So for 10 years, my 40th birthday marked us closing the door on that. So we're like, okay, it's not happening. We're tired. We're all those things, but we've gone, we have to heal and we have to grieve. And it's been 10 years of hoping, praying, believing, doing all the things that you should do as a Christian, or just as anyone should, having surgeries, doing processes, and then coming to the end of it and going, another unanswered prayer, like another one has happened. And in all this time, my other auntie also suicided last year. So now that's 3 that my nana have lost to suicide, and then obviously in my family. So I just got to this point where I was like, I just don't want the enemy to win anymore. Like I'm done with it. And and it's not, I'm not writing off their decisions, because I understand them. Like I completely, I get it. But God, I don't know how else to put it. It's just but God. And living with this unanswered prayer, it shifts your faith. It questions everything. We said it in the intro when we were chatting that, you read your Bible stories, and Moses' mum put her basket in the Nile, but she got it back. But what happens when you don't get it back? And I suppose that's the season I'm in now. And do I have all the answers? No, but I know God does. And the alternative to this isn't much prettier. And if it's hard this way, it's going to be so much harder the other way. And so when I wrote my book, I didn't know how else to do it than to be incredibly vulnerable. And I still remember being at a women's event at church, and one of the pastors there, she was preaching, but she brought her journal out with her, and she preached on fertility, and that, she was kind of going to God for like a vending machine. Like she realized her faith was a bit like that. And it really convicted me that she spoke out of her journal entries, and it sat with me. And I've journaled my whole life. So I went back and I've got journal entries in there from 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's been really cool to kind of, where I don't think I've grown and there's been any blessings, to go, oh, I'm not that person anymore. And God's not, I know different facets of God now other than just this. So that's where the book really came. And then the candles, most people think the candles came first that I've created, but the candles came out of the book because, again, I've read so many books, and I think we lean in and we're like, how do we do this? And I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer to it. It's just it's just really trusting God and figuring it out. But when I write, that's when I hear him. Like, I'll write sentences and be like, oh, like I had never thought of that. So to me, it was really healing, and I saw him. But yeah, when you read a book or you journal something, you put it back on the bookshelf, and that's where it sits. But then it was like, well, let's pull out some of those key words so that when you walk past your bedroom or the bathroom and you see the word loved, you might remember my story, but you'll remember God's love more. And when you're having a really crappy day and you've had a fight with your husband, or you got fired from your job, or you might be sitting there contemplating making the biggest decision of your life that my mum and my aunties made, maybe your eyes might glance at that candle and go, no, I'm loved. I don't understand it, but I'm loved, or there's hope, or I choose to be brave in this moment. Or so that's how those all came about. And really, it all just comes from the mess of those 40 years, just going, I want it to be worth something. That's really, yeah, I just don't want it to just be days that have no value. Now.
Wow, you have certainly walked things that many haven't. And yet what I see in you is joy, and what you offer people is hope. Now, I have a question for you, because I received this beautiful package in the mail from you, which I didn't know was coming. And it was a candle that said promises. And that actually meant a lot to me in that moment as well, because God was talking to me about promises, and they were impossible promises. But
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, whereabouts in the book did that candle come from? What's the story behind that?
That's the hardest candle I ever made. That's the honest truth, because all my promises have seemed to be unfulfilled, or have had lots of struggle to them. And even, this morning, it's uncanny. I mean, it's God, but this morning my husband rang me in tears because he's going through his own stuff, and we're just really struggling to believe that God's in any of it, whether it's my business, his stuff that he's doing at work. And so God's promises have probably been the thing that I have wrestled with the most. And I believe them for other people, but I haven't believed them for me. So I will pray for anyone and know he will move. But when it comes to me, it's always felt like, oh, he's a bit busy today. Maybe it's too hard, maybe it's whatever. So that particular candle really kind of came out from all of it, going, because I thought I was disqualified because I had the mum that was different. I thought I was disqualified because I was fat and ugly, when it was very the opposite. I thought I was disqualified and that's why my prayers weren't being answered. And I couldn't understand how God could be a God of promises and not answer any of them, but he has answered them, just in different ways. And that's, if I had been pregnant and had this child or two, the book would never have been alive. Like, it just would never have been alive. The candles would never have come to life. So when he says no, he says yes. He does both. And it comes to this point where it's like, it just looks different, and that's okay too. And again, Moses's mum, that story sits with me so much in so many ways. But she put a basket in and thought that was it. But he was saying no, but he was saying yes. And so the promises candle is something that, and the scent about the candles is something I pray over, because God tells me what scent is hope. God tells me what scent is promises. God tells me what scent is. And I'm like, God, and you can't choose it. I can't choose it. God chooses it. So a lot of people are like, I want hope, but I want it to be this fragrance. Too bad. It's God. You talk to God about it, because I'm just his employee. It sounds really cruel, but it's true. So when I was sitting and praying over promises, and I have probably about 60 candles that are all tests, I just sat there and I was like, what do your promises smell like? And they are hard to hold. They are sweet. They are gentle. They are a bit prickly sometimes. They are uncomfortable. They are, they're just all those things. And when I smelt that fragrance, and it was like, marshmallows are sweet, but when you roast them, there's something different to them. And God's promises are a bit like that. When you're under fire, sometimes his promises come to fruition, and it doesn't look like what it started off. Like a marshmallow, once it's roasted, looks different. And I'm a queen of analogies. If you don't like analogies, don't buy my book. No, buy my book. But I'm just trying to say. I'm like, I always, because that's how I understand it. I'm a simple girl, but it was just like, and then there was this sweetness and there was those sorts of things. So I still wrestle with that candle. But that's okay too. I think he's okay. I didn't think you were allowed to wrestle with him. And my nana is quite, a classic sort of English Baptist woman, and that's just the way it is. And I love her, and she has been the backbone of our family, but she just does her faith differently. So for a long time I saw that was the way you had to do it. But I was like, you can ask questions and you can wrestle and you can cry and tell him you don't understand and all those things. And I think that's what God's promises are. They're a bit messy and they're a little bit strange, and they're big and they're small, and they're seen and they're unseen, and they're, they slip through your fingers, and then there's something that you hold on to like a life raft sometimes. And so in a really long answer, that's where that candle came from, because it was just, okay, all right, and yeah, that's kind of the best way I can answer it.
I think I'm going to treasure that candle even more now, hearing that. Thank you. And you can smell all of those. So I'm going to be really, I'm looking at it now. I'm going to be smelling in a new way. I do have a question for you, because I know as Christians, when someone's going through a tough time, there can be the Christianese answer to things, and people can be like, very unhelpful.
I have definitely had
and that's
that.
probably the kindest way I can say it. But I would love to know, do you have some advice or things that are helpful for friends, how they could come alongside someone who is walking a tough season and walking something that looks like unanswered prayers and is grappling?
Yeah. For me, and I think it's different with Mum and the loss of her and all that stuff, I hid all of it. Even my dad, who read the book for the first time at Christmas, because I've been very protective over it, his words were to me, I didn't know. And he didn't know. And he didn't, because I hid most of it. Most of my church friends that will read it won't have understood what was happening behind closed doors. And so it can be very hard, I think, for us as friends. We offer on what we see. So we might see, and I have made it my mission to try and find joy in things. But they see maybe a girl that dances terribly in her reels that my husband hates, but, or sees a smiley face now, or all those, or a pretty Instagram page or whatever, but they don't see, and they think, she's okay, she's fine, but they don't see the girl that sits at home by herself for 4 days, 5 days in a row with nothing. Like, it's just hard to put in for people to understand your world, and me to understand theirs sometimes, because you don't see what's happening, behind what's being portrayed. And so what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that how am I trying to say this? It's about saying, how can I help, or what is happening? And it's not judging on what you see. So some people will be like, hey, Claire, come over, have dinners, do this. And it's not more company that you need sometimes, it's just more love. And sometimes it might just be a text, or, hey, I'm going to come to your house for half an hour and pray for you and then leave. Like, that's just what's going to happen. Because as much as they think they might be being helpful, saying, come over and have dinner with all my kids, it's really painful to do that, because it's something that you will never have. Or them saying, I'd love to be able to sleep in, or go to the pool, go lay out in the pool, or read a book whenever. Yeah, sure. But that means also you'll have every Christmas completely by yourself. Like, when you think about the far reachings that pain has. And so I learned, on the flip side, not to be like, it must be great to have all these children, and not see the struggle that it is for some women that behind closed doors cannot keep it together because they've got a sick child, or something's happening in their home, or they don't have enough money. Because I was doing the same thing, and God was kind of like, we throw these grenades that we think are snowballs of love, but they're actually grenades, because we say things and we're like, it must be so wonderful to have Christmas like that, or it must be so wonderful to have all your parents alive. But you don't know if there's all this fighting happening behind, or judgment, or rejection, and they'd actually prefer not to have a family, or not to So we do it on both sides. And I even had a chat with a friend at church on Sunday, and she was telling me she was pregnant for the second time and wanted to do it delicately. And I was like, you have the right to celebrate. You have the right to be joyful. You have the right to do all those things. And I love that you do it in tenderness to me, but let God worry about the pain that I'll go through. You just celebrate the joy. And so if you've got a friend that's going through something, ask how you can help them. Are they okay? Are they really okay? Is there anything they want to talk about? It's just having an open conversation and being aware that what you see isn't maybe the reality of what they're going through. And if you're not comfortable to have the big conversations, don't start them. I've had that where people are like, oh, what was the hardest thing about writing about the book? But they wanted a sentence. And I'm like, I'm not a sentence kind of girl. So you should know that. Most people should know that about me. But don't ask a big question and expect a small answer. And it's okay as a friend as well to say, I wish I could do more. Like or it sucks. It just really sucks. And it's like, yeah, it really sucks. And I've had friends just look at me blankly, and that's okay too. I think we have to have the answers, but you don't always have the answers, and you don't always have the right words to say. And that's why I think books like mine, I'm one in 7 billion stories in the world, but it's one more story that makes God bigger than the mess or the pain. And so if more and more people read stories like that and hear stories like that, then eventually, because I think faith is just built little step, little step, little step, little step, little step. It's just like one after the other. So if you just keep hearing little stories, and maybe as a friend, it's like, hey, this story might help you. This book, this candle, whether it's mine or someone else's, this might help you. I don't understand. I don't know how to help. Or ask them what they want. Sometimes I have wanted to be invited to a family dinner and know what it's like, but I won't ever ask because I feel like you don't need another mouth to feed. You don't need another person in your house. You don't need, and I'm like, but I love the chaos and the mess and the kids screaming, and because I never get it, and I never had it when I was a young girl either, because it was just me and mum, and she was asleep for most of the time. So I was doing the cooking, the cleaning, the food shop, the this, the that, and I was doing that from a very, very young age, from 10 or whatever. So I love sometimes being around noise and chaos because it's so foreign to me. It's like a gift. It's like, I love it. So and I think that you just stop offering solutions a bit, because the solutions are hard. People are like, oh, you should see this fertility doctor, or you should go see this counselor, or you should do this. And I'm like, or I could just chat to God and work it out. So I think if you're a Christian friend as well, make God the final point, because neither of you will have the answers. But if you include God in it, I think then you're going to have a pretty good chance of getting it right. I think
it's holding that space for someone to be not
just unravel a bit if they want to. Just if they want to cry, if they want to have a whine, if they want to say a naughty word, don't, like, you're not going to get shot by lightning if they say it. They probably shouldn't say it all the time. But sometimes you need to be someone safe sometimes for someone to release. And that's where it's like, because I can't always release to my husband because he's carrying it too. And so I'm like, well, I need to talk to someone else. And sometimes it's someone that's been in it, and sometimes it's someone that hasn't. And it's so, and just be aware, if you're not being invited into it, it's not because they don't love you. They're often protecting you, or their circle is already a bit full. I think when you've been in it, you have a very small circle of who you let speak in. And it's not that you haven't earned the right to come in, but it's like, I don't need any more voices, because otherwise you lean more onto the voice. And I think you touched on it this morning on Monday, where you lean more on the voice of everyone else than the voice of God. So it's very intentional for people like me, where I have this very small circle as well. So it can be easy for the other person to get offended, and it's so far away from that. It's just so complex, really. But luckily God's a complex God, and he can work it out.
So I'd love to know, because you said that in your book, you actually shared things that you hadn't told other people and you kept to yourself. Did you find it healing? For example, your dad reading what you went through back then, and other people learning. Was there a healing process of that?
There was a healing in, I think for me, with the people reading it. So it helped me forgive once more. And it helped me forgive God again, because I was kind of like, why didn't you interrupt those moments? Why didn't you come in? But now I look back and I see, if he did, I wouldn't have the story. And maybe, just maybe, I'm a blessed one because I've gone through all that. So this is my story, and he's trusted me with this story, and he wants to be, and I was thinking about it on Sunday, he wants to be associated with my mess. Like, that's a big, he wants the name God to be associated with the mess of Claire Roberts. Like, that just boggles my brain. But maybe all of this has been a way to definitely heal. But yeah, it definitely helped me heal. It helped me forgive a lot of people, because I revisited things that I thought I'd dealt with, but I hadn't, especially childhood stuff, because sitting for 9 weeks by yourself at a computer reminded me of all those days I'd come home to myself, and I thought I'd kind of dealt with all that. And I'm like, oh, no. But my biggest fear was that I made pain the hero of it and not God, because I don't. And there were parts of my book where were a bit whingy, as one of my girlfriends said when she edited it. She's like, this is a bit whingy. Like, does it serve the greater good? But it was good, because the first time I wrote it, it was just a mess of raw emotion and just everything. And then I was like, that's not going to help someone else heal. I think that's going to help them celebrate what's happening more. So that was a constant battle of what's necessary to the story for them to know God as a loving, kind, generous, patient, and able God, and what actually gives more voice to the pain. But yeah, it definitely was healing. And there's one chapter called Forgive Yourself. And that's, for me, that's probably the hardest one for anyone to read, because it was about my first business prior to this, and it didn't work. Surprise, surprise. But I was trying to fill a circle with a square-shaped solution. So that was in the early years of us not being able to conceive, and I really wanted to do that. And I was in a sense where I had no idea who I was, what I was doing. So I was just copying everyone else. But in that, I made some really bad financial decisions that affected us financially. And there's so much shame attached to that. And that is still something that I've got to kind of process. But that's probably the most raw chapter in all of it. Given what everything's in there, that's probably the most intense, because yeah, I think all the other pain is someone else's, apart from the eating disorder, where like it's based off their actions, but this was my own. Like, this was my reaction to pain, and I did not do it well. And that really was why I wrote the book. And that's the whole reason it's called Standing Well, because a girlfriend had said to me, Claire, there's a difference between standing, because I was originally going to be called Still Standing. And she's like, still standing or standing well. Still standing, you can stand, but you can be bitter, you can be angry, you can not have healed, you can not have forgiven, you can not have done all those things, but you're still standing 100%. Or standing well is that you've learned to love, you've learned to forgive, you've learned to have hope, you've learned to be joy, you've learned to do all those things. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting shift, because the very original title of the book was Responsible with Your Pain. And that was what I felt with God. It was at Colour, and Bobby Houston did the communion for the fertility section. As most women in that room did, shattered, broke, cried. And I just heard him say, it's time to be responsible with your pain. It's time to be better at it. It's time to, and not in like a dad, you go sit in the naughty corner for a day because you haven't done it well, but just, this is not a new pain. But my love could be new every day if you find a new way to be responsible with it, a new way to love other people, to heal. So the book is very much not about condemning anyone. And I said that to my dad and a few other people. I'm like, there's no names in it. There's nothing. I said, this is just my journey with God through all the different seasons of either disappointment or unanswered prayer or all that, and discovering who God is through all that seasons, a bit like David did in Psalms. And I am nowhere near like King David, but that's how he found God, through, when you read the Psalms, it's this melody of angst and wrestle and struggle and confusion to he is the most incredible God. And I think that's what pain has done. And if you allow it, it will let you go on this discovery where you find you have all your questions, but at the end of it, you always come back to he is able, he is well, he is strong, he is loving. And I think it's a constant journey. There's no final point in it. And even if I had a child now, I'm sure that there'd be something else. you know, and there might be something else. And so, yeah, and it's kind of, and the book's been like drawing a line in the sand. It's like, okay, it's done. That's 40 years in the wilderness. We're done. Like, new season, let's go and let's focus on whatever it is now. And just trying to, yeah. But I haven't been this joyful and this happy about, like, it's taken a long time. It's taken 40 years to get here. So, and I've definitely cried and done my fair share of everything else. So, but yeah, I am proud of it and I love it. And I think God's in it in every way. And I think it will help someone just find a little bit of encouragement or hope. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, he's just a good guy. He really is. Yeah, just don't let the enemy win. And that's what the book's about a bit. Like, yeah, let's just not let pain win anymore. You know, let's claim back the beauty in our lives. That's kind of what it's all about.
Oh, it sounds delicious, and I actually can't wait to read it, Claire. I have one more question for you. You were talking about forgiveness and realizing there were still people to forgive. So my question is for you, because I love to be practical.
Yeah.
How do you know when you've forgiven someone?
When I'm not planning, I know I haven't forgiven them when I hope that what I do makes them realize that they were wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like, say I got invited to the Today Show to get interviewed for my book, and Craig, like that's my husband, thought that I wasn't able, like my book was never going to be a success, all the rest of it. But then I got on there and I kind of did no. I know I haven't forgiven him for not believing in me or whatever it is. So when you're thinking, I hope they suffer, or I hope that they know they're wrong, or I hope they hurt, or any of that kind of mindset, I know I haven't forgiven them. And when I have forgiven them, I don't care if they care or not. I don't. I'm like, if you can't see that what God has done is good, that's on you. That's not on me anymore. But I've sat in that camp for a long time. I'd like to say I do it like that, but I've sat there for months and gone, no, I hope that they get proved wrong. I hope that they know they're wrong. I hope that, all those sorts of things. And I journal. So for me, it's just writing it down constantly, and just going, God, I forgive them. And then it's like, okay, do I? And then I normally whinge for another 5 minutes about why I don't actually forgive them. and then the next day I'm normally like, no, I do forgive them. I promise you I forgive them now. But when the outcome of that doesn't bother me anymore, I know I've forgiven them, because it really does set you free. It just doesn't matter what people think about you, any of that sort of stuff. But it really does free you, and it does really just, if you don't forgive for them, just forgive for yourself. Like, be incredibly selfish and just forgive for yourself, because when you don't have all that stuff there, it just makes it so much easier to do life. It makes it easy to hear God. It just makes life so much easier. And it's not easy to forgive. It's really everyone's gone through something where it's just not easy, but it's worth it. 100%. It's worth it. And I always think, well, how many times has God forgiven me? How many times? Like, every day I do stupid and intentionally dumb things, sometimes hurtful. I do. Like, let's be honest. But he forgives me every time. So why can't I do it to someone else? And I kind of go, all right. And he died on the cross so that we knew we were forgiven. So then why can't we do it for someone else as well? But it takes time, and it does. So, if anyone's kind of going, I wish I was like her, it's taken 40 years to get here. Like, I'm not going to say some lessons are easier than others. And, I'm just kind of doing my bit to be a voice of hope and encouragement in the world and give practical tools to do that. But I've had to go through some pretty yucky things to get to that point. And it's been a choice every time. And we're given a choice every time. So, choose to forgive, choose to just find something to be thankful for, to smile about, to laugh about. All those little things, and all the things you touch on so beautifully, which is always, get around the right community so that you're always hearing the right wisdom as well, is important. Yeah.
Good. Oh, well, I'm glad that you chose to write your book. I'm glad that you chose to, do your Instagram. I'm glad that you chose to really show up and be seen, because that's hard. And you are doing it so well. And you are bringing that joy, that hope, but also I see you. If you're having a hard time, I see you.
Yeah.
And so, Claire, how can people who are listening, I know that it's going to be really connecting to some people's hearts. How can they connect with you and find out more?
Well, they can go to my Instagram page, which is Words by Claire Roberts, Claire, the French way, or the website, www.wordsbyclaireroberts.com, or Facebook. And you can find me there, all my books, all my candles. You can always DM me, reach out, ask for prayer, ask for advice. I try to be as open and honest as I can be. I know what it's like to feel unseen. So I just really want to make sure everyone knows they're seen and their life is of value. So reach out, say hi, get involved, and that's it.
Oh, thank you for your time, for sharing so honestly. And we're going to meet one day very soon, I'm sure, in person.
Yeah.
Thank you, beauty.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me on Brave with Lisa. I hope that it has inspired or impacted you in a small or large way. Feel free to comment, to subscribe, and share with some friends. And please join us next week on another conversation we will have here on this channel on Brave with Lisa.